Jesus made two personal comments that Passover night that were bizarre and hard to understand. To be sure, he said some other things that were puzzling, but that wasn't so unusual, because many times we were left wondering about what Jesus' sayings meant. This time, though, he spoke directly about two people. He said firstly that one person at the table would betray him, and that while that person would be incredibly sorry, it had been foretold that Jesus must die. It was unbelievable that any of us there would be prepared to betray our master. I was pretty worked up about it, this thought, and I didn't hold back in expressing my opinions. I just wanted to get to the bottom of things, to find out who would dare think themselves more important than Jesus. But to my shame, Jesus stopped us all talking and arguing. He looked at each of us and told us that the usual way of the world regarding leaders as more important than servants wasn't to be our way. He went on to say that he had come as a servant. I often didn't understand this man I was following, the one I'd given everything up for. At the start of the night, he tried to wash my feet, along with the other disciples. And when I objected, he said that I couldn't belong to him unless I let him. Well, I was never one for half measures, and so I told Jesus he'd better wash all of me, because I was fully committed to him. The second personal comment Jesus made that night was made directly to me. We were walking to the Mount of Olives after the Passover meal, and he commented that all of us would desert him when he was betrayed. He quoted Zechariah the prophet, saying, "God will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered." I couldn't keep quiet, could I? "Well, it won't be me deserting you," I said indignantly. "You know I'd die with you if it comes to that," I spluttered. "But if all of your other so-called disciples leave you, I won't," I boasted. Looking back now, I remember that Jesus had just finished teaching us about one not being better than the other, and about how he wanted us to love one another when he was gone, so the world would know we were his disciples. What was I thinking? It didn't matter what I thought I'd do. Jesus looked me in the eye and said, "I tell you the truth, Peter, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will deny 3 times that you even know me." I refused to believe it. I was pretty stirred up. We reached the garden on the mount, and I was happy to have some distance between the master and myself. I went alone to pray, and since it was late, and I didn't feel like making conversation with the others, I drifted off to sleep right there next to a tree. Jesus asked a couple of us to be with him in spirit, but my spirit was wounded and I was confused and upset. Finally, Judas arrived, that traitor whom Jesus had pointed out at the supper, and amongst shouts, soldiers, and a scuffle, they went to arrest Jesus, and I drew my sword. I meant it when I said I'd die for him, and I wasn't about to let those Roman thugs and temple guard traitors anywhere near him. I sliced off one of their ears. I was a bit off base and missed his skull. Wouldn't you know it though, Jesus told me off, and not them. Talk about my thoughts being off base as well. In an act of compassion, he restored the thug's ear and told me the angels would protect him if he needed it, but that he had to suffer this way. I didn't understand any of it, but I couldn't leave him and followed to the courtyard of the high priest. My heart was frozen in fear, and the night air froze my body as well, so I moved closer to the fire. As the night wore on, 3 separate people tried to identify me with Jesus, but in an effort to be not dragged into controversy or discussion, I swore I didn't know him. And then as morning dawned around that fire pit, I heard the rooster crowing. The sound went right to my cold heart, and I looked towards the room where Jesus was. He looked straight at me, but I couldn't hold his sad gaze, as my eyes filled with tears and sobs shook my body. I ran as far as I could, away from the warmth of that fire and the strange mix of warmth and compassion in those familiar eyes. Those 3 dark days were wretched for me, and I couldn't find a way forward. But then again, I'm Peter, that person who flies headfirst into any situation I believe fiercely in, with not much thought as to consequences or reason. In my defence, though, my cavalier ways are just one side of a deep, tender soul that is sensitive to all that goes on around me.
I don't like early mornings, although you'd think I would be used to them from my military training days. I don't much like the Jews under my governance either, with all their religious trappings and pretension. Today I had to face both. Right on sunup, a rabble of Jews were demanding my attention because of the man called Jesus they were holding prisoner. They turned up accusing the man of doing evil, of calling himself Christ, and of leading their people astray. They were very worked up and shouting out, "Crucify him!" It was all quite bizarre and was disturbing the peace, so I separated the crowd from the man and took him into my chambers to see what I could find out. They had been mocking him by calling him the King of the Jews and saying that it was because he called himself this that he was dangerous. I asked him outright if he was the King of the Jews, and his answer surprised me. "You have said so," he said, then asked, "Do you say this of your own accord, or is it just what others have told you?" I wasn't prepared for his question. Here they were trying to condemn him to death, and he was checking on my motives rather than worrying about himself. He was unusual, that was for sure, meek and quiet and not offering any defence to all their accusations. I almost began to feel sorry for this poor soul that I could tell was a victim of the Jewish priestly hierarchy nonsense. I had actually heard great things about this Jesus. People had been reporting that he had healed whole towns of all their sicknesses and even raised some back to life. Something within me just didn't want to give these people what they wanted, and so I was relieved to find a way out by sending Jesus off to visit Herod. Well, he was from his district after all, not mine. My peace was short-lived though. Herod couldn't get the man to talk either and sent him back to me. He told me later that he'd hoped to see one of the miraculous signs that Jesus was becoming famous for, but no luck. I called the chief priest and leaders back to my place and told them that I couldn't find any wrongdoing to back up their claims about Jesus, and neither could Herod. Herod punished Jesus by mocking him and dressing him up in a purple kingly robe. I was prepared to punish him with lashings and then let him go. It was the Jewish Passover feast, and I couldn't see why this man, even if he was a lunatic, would be powerful enough for him to take up the priest's precious time. They should have been off calling the people to celebrate the time when God saved them from Egyptian slavery. But here they were whining and indignant about a poor chap who was claiming he could save them a second time. They were still in my courtyard, shouting and whipping up into a frenzy when they demanded that, according to custom, the governor was required to release to them a Jewish prisoner on the day of the Passover. I saw my chance to free Jesus by offering them the notorious Barabbas, someone who was well known for murder and insurrection. Surely the leaders wouldn't want this convicted man living among them, but could rather tolerate a harmless peasant Galilean instead. I couldn't have been more wrong. It was then that I realised the malignant extent of the priest's jealousy over someone who threatened their position of authority among the people. I don't even pretend to understand their religious system, and I am now certain that even if I did, I want nothing to do with their God whom they claim to follow. I didn't really care what happened to this Jewish madman, but I am a fair man, and I did give him the chance to stand up for himself. The leaders tried to blackmail me by saying that I wasn't Caesar's friend if I allowed a man to call himself a king while Caesar was king. What a load of crock. This man was clearly no king despite him talking about a kingdom, and the Jews only acknowledged that Caesar because we forced them to, not out of loyalty. But there was something about Jesus that really had them all stirred. I was losing my patience and hated being forced to pass an unfair judgment. Strangely, my wife emerged from our rooms and warned me not to have anything to do with this man's case, as she said she had dreamed about him in the night. By now, I would gladly have listened to her because the crowd chanting for Barabbas' release and Jesus' death was getting so heated that I knew I'd be dealing with a riot next if something wasn't decided soon. What I did next, I'm not proud of, and that's a huge admission from a Roman citizen and governor. We are known for our military might. Some call it harshness, but in that moment I felt powerless. I took a basin and in front of the crowd I washed my hands, declaring that I was innocent of Jesus' blood. Of course I wasn't innocent, was I? I just condemned a poor beggar to death. The Jewish leaders, who couldn't care less about my authority any other day, rubbed their greedy hands together and continued their oppressive righteous attitudes. They were maliciously satisfied for me to act treacherously to justify their own treachery. I felt wretched, and in my anger at both the crowd and at myself, I sent Jesus to be beaten. I signed the documents for 2 other prisoners to be crucified at the same time, and went into my chambers to be rid of the whole business for now, and try to find some peace. I must have fallen asleep briefly as I sat in a trance listening to the crowds in the distance follow the prisoners down the Via Dolorosa to the hill. I was woken sometime around the 9th hour by an earthquake and extremely eerie darkness. I struggled to wake up and then to find my way to the hill Golgotha. I saw that Jesus hung there under the words I'd penned. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. Some of the leaders had argued with me that it should say, this is what he calls himself, not what he is. But I didn't care less what they thought. They wanted him gone because they said that him acting as a king was a crime, and so king was the title he deserved, while they acted like his witless subjects. A wealthy man from Arimathea asked me if he could have Jesus' body to lay in his own tomb. And as the Jewish Sabbath was approaching, I saw no reason why not. I've overseen many a crucifixion. As a Roman, we rule with power and strength to keep the citizens and subjects in our provinces under control. I'm a good governor. But this one was different. I can't explain why. But maybe the centurion who was at Jesus' cross the whole time says it better than I could. Surely this man was innocent and is the Son of God.
You won't know my name, but you will know what I am famous for. I had gone with a few friends to listen to a man called Jesus. He was preaching on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. There were heaps of people there. In our village, we had heard stories about a man who could heal the blind and sick. My neighbor's uncle had been healed from leprosy. Leprosy! Normally you had to go away from your house and weren't welcome back. But this guy did come back. So yeah, I wanted to see this Jesus for myself. Wouldn't it be so cool to see someone get healed? A month in hand, then boom, it is all good and straight. Awesome. So yeah, I went along with my friends. Mum, as usual, had given me some lunch. She makes these yummy bread rolls, and Dad had caught some fish and dried them out. I couldn't believe the crowd that turned up. It was massive. There must have been our people from every village around there. I knew a few people, but there were masses that I didn't know. I sat down, planning to eat my lunch, but Jesus was just amazing. I couldn't take my eyes off him. He healed the girl who was carried in by her father. Another guy was blind. His friends led him in, and then he could see. You should have seen the look on his face when he looked up to see us staring and cheering. Then there were stories. The rabbis at school are pretty boring. Most of the time they read stuff and we had to memorize it. Most of the time I don't even think about it. But the stories Jesus told, he just made everything come alive. I was getting such a different way of looking at how I should treat other people and who God is. I just completely forgot about eating. Then I saw a disciple, Andrew, coming my way. He was asking if anyone had any food. I suddenly remembered my lunch. I figured he was going to give it to Jesus or something. I was a bit hungry, but I wanted to help Jesus out too. So I put my hand up. Andrew came over. He was so happy, but you could tell he didn't think this was really what Jesus wanted. I followed and well, you know the rest. My little lunch fed thousands. I'm not sure my mom really believed me when I told her later, but she was all told by plenty of others. There were other times I'd go and see Jesus. I thought maybe when I was older, I'd be part of his government or whatever he planned for this earth. He would have been such a great leader, all of which makes what I just have witnessed so awful, so distressing, just so unbelievable. I've just seen a Roman soldier put Jesus up on a cross. Jesus, the man who has only helped people, who healed, who told stories, who gave us hope. He only cared. Why him? Why did he have to die? He had the power to heal the sick. Why didn't he save himself? Why did he have to die? It was so brutal. The blood, the shouting and swearing, some people laughing, others crying and screaming in horror. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't look away. I wanted to be there because Jesus had been with us when we needed him most. And I wanted to be anywhere but there. Then there was an earthquake. The sky went dark. Maybe this was Jesus coming back to life. But no. His body was taken from the cross. He was dead. Dead. What happens now? Were all his stories wrong? Is there nothing better to come? Why? Why did he have to die?
Jerusalem was bustling when I arrived on Friday morning. The skies were blue and clear, and the sun was beating down hot as I made my descent into the crowds of the city. Jewish patrons everywhere were moving through the crowds, arms laden with goods from the market for the Passover feast. I can still remember the dust in the air as it was kicked up by the donkeys and the children playing in the street, as mothers and wives beat rugs through windows in preparation. The buzz in the city was electric as the celebration planning happened all around, and I was anxious to arrive at my friend's house to help with the final preparations for tonight's feast. My sons Rufus and Alexander had travelled with me that year for the Passover. Their mother and I had decided that they were finally old enough to make the long trek from Cyrene with me to experience the Passover in the Holy City. The month-long trek had been a big journey for them, but they had held high spirits the whole way, and I remember seeing their wide-eyed stares and grins as we moved through the streets of Jerusalem, and how it had filled me with pride to be able to share this ceremony and celebration with them as I had done with my father when I was a boy. I don't know how long we were walking before I started to notice that the crowds were getting denser and larger as we moved through the city. I remember grabbing both boys' hands and maneuvering through the crowds as we tried to make our way to our friend's street. But the pull of the crowd tugged us, and I soon recognized that we were heading in the opposite direction, towards Golgotha. My blood went cold as I realized we were going in that direction. I had been there once before and could vividly remember the crucifixes and bodies of criminals that hung there, a cruel reminder of the Roman rule that hung around our throats. I did not want my boys to see the harshness of life in that way, and began to search for a break in the crowds, a direction to pull them out and turn them around. But the crowds were surging and pushing us forward with no break, and they began to get louder and louder in the exclamations. They were angry, shouting for the death of someone. We finally poured out into a larger street, and I found a spot on the side and pushed the boys towards it, next to some onlookers. I remember turning to the gentleman on my right and shouting over the noise, "Who is it they are crying out for?" And the stranger turned to me and responded with empty eyes, "His name is Jesus of Nazareth." I'd heard of that Jesus, this Jesus that the man spoke of. There had been whispers at home where he was the Messiah, and rumours of miracles done by this man. The stories of healing the sick, casting out demons, and even bringing his disciple Lazarus back from the dead had seemed too miraculous to be true. They were intriguing, and my friends and I had discussed them at length as we heard them. But I remember thinking in that moment, how could they be true if he was about to be crucified as a criminal? Over the heads of the crowd, I spotted the red and silver helmets of Roman soldiers as the crowd began to make way for their procession. I instinctively tucked the boys under my arms and behind me. The shouting became more and more ferocious as they got closer and closer to where we stood. It was a gruesome scene that came around the corner into our view. The man, this Jesus of Nazareth, was surrounded by soldiers, naked and bloody, his back ripped and bleeding out on the ground, with a crown of thorns jammed to his bleeding head, with bare and bruised feet. I remember a lump in my throat at the sight of it all. No man deserved this fate. And then all of a sudden, as he was passing right in front of us, he fell down on his knees and the cross rolled off his back. The soldiers behind him that saw him fall shouted and kicked him, but he couldn't get up. And then their eyes were on me and my stomach dropped. A rough hand clamped onto my shoulder and pulled me into the street before I could protest and demanded that I carry his cross for him. I was in complete shock, paralyzed. It wasn't until he shouted at me again that I bent and picked up the cross. Locking eyes with Jesus of Nazareth in that moment when I reached down to take the cross from his beaten shoulders changed my life forever. I will never forget that day. I can still feel the weight of the cross as it bore into my back and the guilt that filled me that this man in front of me was going to die this day and I was helping. I can still feel the sticky, hot blood as it ran from the cross and down to my cheek. His blood shed for what crime I knew not. The trek up the hill to Golgotha was long and hard and I was exhausted by the time we reached the spot of his crucifixion. The soldiers ordered me to place the cross on the ground and then sent me away. And shame and loss filled me that day as I made my way back down the hill. This man did not seem guilty like the others lined up, who were shouting and struggling against the soldiers. I now know that this man is our Saviour, our Messiah, the Son of God. Hearing of his resurrection a few days later was the most joyous moment of my life. The knowledge that our Heavenly Father sent his Son in the form of this man from Nazareth and allowed a humble man from Cyrene to carry his cross in his moment of need. Phew, I do not have words to express the depth of what that means as his chosen people and being his servant in his time of suffering.
You're asking me what happened that day? Well, I'll tell you. Fresh in my mind as if it was yesterday. For it is the first thing I think about in the morning. And it keeps me awake at night. Those paranoid Jewish leaders begged Pilate to have a guard set outside the tomb of Jesus, for fear of followers would come in at night and remove the body, thereby giving credence to his predictions that after 3 days he would rise. If only they knew what was coming. So there were, the first thing we did to seal the tomb, nothing was going to break that seal or move that stone, or so we thought. Then we settled in for what we hope would be fairly normal, easy posting. If we were being honest, we were all a little on edge. After yesterday's happenings, the whole town was freaked out by what followed. Jesus dead on the cross, earthquakes, dead bodies coming to life, temple curtain torn from top to bottom, supernatural stuff. We would rather have been anywhere but outside his tomb. And with nothing to do but wait, those events were the only thing replaying in my mind. And though we are well-trained, battle-hardened soldiers, that stuff was so normal. It was weird and make us uneasy. But things were about to get a whole lot worse. Just as the two Marys arrived to visit the tomb, there was another earthquake. A great earthquake. And at the same time, this incredible being, an angel, slowly descended from heaven. His face was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. He just rolled away that stone away from the tomb like it weighed nothing. And then he just sat on it and looked at us. Every last one of us was by this time shaking so hard from terror. We just flopped down to the ground like dead men. I couldn't speak or move, but I could still hear and see through my fingers what was happening. I heard the angel say to the two Marys, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus, who you crucified. He's not here, he's risen. Come and see where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen." They were full of fear, but also joy, and raced off to do his bidding. I watched all the while. I lay like a dead man on the ground. When we were finally able to move, some of the guards left and went and told the Pharisees what had happened at the tomb. The Pharisees were not happy and bribed the guards with heaps of money to say that they were falling asleep and that Jesus was stolen. Good luck to them. We know the truth. We saw it. I am a believer now. I know that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. I know that he lived and died for us. I will never be the same again.
After most of the crowds had dispersed, I could still hear the soldiers laughing and jeering. How could they, after they had just crucified Jesus, my son, God's son? Could they not see that Jesus was different? Someone special, that he was truly the Son of God.
I don't think I will ever forget hearing their mocking laughter and jeering. The sound of their laughter and jeering just still rings loudly in my ears. It felt as though my heart had been ripped out of my chest. Jesus, my best friend, the one who loved me and saved me from all my demons. The physical pain was unbearable.
My son did not deserve to die. He was innocent. He never did anything to hurt anyone. He always showed great loving kindness and compassion towards everyone. He spoke the truth and he paid the price. While we sat weeping and comforting each other as the sun lowered in the horizon, we watched as Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus carried Jesus' body from the cross and into Joseph's new tomb. And they wrapped his body in white linen cloth.
Nicodemus had bought the spices, 100 pounds of aloe and myrrh, but the Holy Sabbath was drawing near, so we were unable to finish the ceremony, and preparing Jesus' body was as we had to return home before sunset to rest on the Sabbath, and we would come back early on the Sunday morning.
It felt so final. The memories that flashed through my mind of when he was a wee boy, how he would sit on my lap as I told stories of creation, of the flood and the days of Moses.
But he loved you dearly, and I know how much you loved him.
I know that Jesus truly loved me. Even when he was close to the end on the cross, he thought of me and gave me his beloved friend to be my new son. Jesus knew that John would love and take care of me, just as he had always had. Jesus was so selfless. He always put others' needs before his own. That Sabbath felt empty. Sounds and images all flashed through my mind. I could hear the pounding of the hammer as the nails were driven through my son's hands. The cries from his lips as they pressed the crown onto his head. And I could see the look of pain and anguish as his innocent blood ran down his bruised, battered face. I wonder if these terrible images of his suffering and death would ever be erased from my mind.
It was a terrible time. Even though you were going through such sorrow and loss, you were such a good friend to me. You wiped many tears from my eyes and held me and comforted me when I was overcome with grief. Sunday morning seemed to take an eternity to come. The first sign of the rising sun, and I was on the way to the tomb. while it was a difficult task ahead, we were eager to get there. We knew that Jesus' body would be swollen by now. His face would be ghostly white, and death's odor would be pungent. But even so, we wanted to get there. I remember asking if you thought we would have the strength to move the heavy stone from the entrance to the tomb. But shock when we rounded the bend and we noticed that the stone had already been rolled away from the entrance. I remember the fear and anticipation we felt as we clung to each other and gingerly walked into the tomb. We looked at the place where his body had been laid just days before, and my heart dropped. It was no longer there. We wondered who could have removed Jesus' body and where had they taken him. The white linen cloth was folded and lying there, but his body was gone. I had wanted to see him just one more time. Then suddenly 2 men appeared. They shined brighter than the midday sun, and their eyes were bright and were dazzling. We were terrified and we both bowed down. Do you remember what they said to us?
Yes. They asked, "Why are you looking in a tomb when he's already alive?"
It was strange. We had seen Jesus on the cross. We had seen him laid in the tomb. We knew he was no longer alive. We had seen him die with our very own eyes. Then they told us he was not there, that he had come back to life. They reminded us that Jesus had told us that he would be betrayed and handed over to evil men, and that he would be crucified, but he would rise again on the 3rd day.
It was strange. As the man spoke to us, the memories came flooding back into our minds. It felt as if Jesus had told us again in person. We realised that everything he had told us had happened right down to the very detail. We had so much to share with the others. So we rushed back to Jerusalem to tell his disciples all that we had seen and heard. It must have sounded like a crazy fairy tale to them. The look of total disbelief was written all over their faces. They really did not want to believe us.
Peter and John ran to the tomb to see for themselves. I ran behind but was unable to keep up. So by the time I got to the tomb, Peter and John were already on their way out of the tomb. They had seen it was empty. Jesus' body was really gone. Peter looked absolutely bewildered, but John, who was Jesus' beloved disciple, came out believing. Peter and John went back to the other disciples, leaving me alone. I sat outside the tomb weeping for my Lord. It was a heavy burden to bear. I had lost my best friend. Suddenly a man appeared in front of me, and thinking he was perhaps the gardener, I asked him if he had removed Jesus' body and to tell me where he had put him so that I can go to him. Then I heard the man say my name, Mary. He knew my name. I recognized his voice. This had to be Jesus. I went towards him and I wanted to touch him, to feel his loving hands, to look into his eyes and feel his love, but he said, "Don't touch me. I've not yet ascended to my Father. I'm going to my Father, your Father, my God and your God. Go tell my disciples what you have seen and tell them I go ahead of them and meet them at Galilee." I was so overcome with excitement, I immediately turned and ran back to Jerusalem to tell everyone that I had seen Jesus and to tell them what he had said.
This crazy heart couldn't have been more humbled and ecstatic than when I heard Mary's words. Our Lord is risen. His body isn't in the tomb, and he's going to meet us in Galilee. Oh, and he said to tell this to all the disciples and Peter. He mentioned me specifically, but this time he wasn't saying I'd deny him before his death, but that I would specifically want to know that he was alive. I fell to my knees sobbing for the second time in 3 days. I couldn't stop myself, but was on my feet racing to the tomb just to make sure Mary was telling us the truth. Don't judge me, okay? I wasn't thinking straight again. That night I got to see our master in person. He came right into the room where we were meeting. I didn't hesitate, I never do, to throw myself at his feet in contrition, and then to look deeply into those eyes. I'll never forget the feeling of forgiveness that washed through my soul and it was then that I began to understand.
What happened next, you ask? It was the evening of the first day. Most of us were gathered together in the house with the door locked tight. We thought that the Jews may attack us. Suddenly, Jesus was there in front of us, telling us, "Peace be with you." He said it twice, so it must have been a really important one.
I wasn't there on the evening of the first day, so when the others told me that Jesus had appeared to them, I was so confused. How could it be Jesus? I had seen him die right there on the cross. No, I would not be taken in and made a fool of. I would only believe if I could see the nail marks in his hands and put my fingers where the nails had been and put my hand into his side. Then I would believe and blow me over with a feather. It was about a week later when we were all together again in the house with the doors locked that Jesus appeared and told me to do just what I had said to the disciples a day earlier. Come, see my hands and feel the nail holes. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe.
Many of us thought it was a ghost, but Jesus said to touch him because ghosts don't have flesh. Then Jesus asked for something to eat and explained everything to us, saying that prophecy had to be fulfilled as in the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms. It was like we were just hearing about it for the very first time, but it just made sense. Now we could see how everything fitted into place. Jesus told us that his Father had sent him and that he was now sending us. He told us to receive the Holy Spirit, and if we forgive others of their sins, they are forgiven. But if we don't forgive them, they are not.
One evening, Simon Peter got the bright idea to go out fishing on the sea to Tiberias. We were out all night without one bite, so we headed back to the shore, feeling quite disheartened. On the beach, about 100 yards away, stood a man who called a friendly greeting. The man already knew that we had not caught anything, so he told us to throw the net on the other side of the boat. What? Any experienced fisherman knows that the best fishing is in the dark hours. And what difference would it make putting the net on the other side of the boat? And so, close to shore. Oh well, we had nothing to lose. We had hardly got the net in the water when we could see it was full. Suddenly, Peter shouted, "It's the Lord!" He grabbed his outer cloak and jumped out of the boat and ran ashore to greet Jesus before we could respond. The rest of us tried hauling the net into the boat, but the boat was already tipping over as we struggled with the sheer numbers of fish, so we decided to drag it to shore. It was amazing that even with so many fish, the net, it did not break.
I was just so excited to see Jesus again.
We made our way to Galilee as Jesus had instructed us, and he appeared to us again. We worshipped him, but there were still a few among us that doubted. Jesus came to them and said that all authority in heaven and on earth had been given to him. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you, always to the very end of time.
Jesus appeared to us several times over the next few weeks, but on the 40th day after rising from the dead, he led us out to Bethany, where he lifted his hands and blessed us. While he was doing that, he rose up and was taken to heaven. What a day! It was amazing to see it with our own eyes. We couldn't stay quiet. We sang and danced all the way back to Jerusalem. Whoa, whoa, whoa! We had been given a job to do by God. It was important. We waited for the Holy Spirit, just as Jesus had instructed, and then you should have seen what happened. But that will have to wait for another time.